That Sunday afternoon, she stole food from a billionaire's wedding, and the crowd nearly tore her apart. But just as they called for her arrest, the groom shouted, "Wait! I know her." Before we dive in, I know many of you are watching from all corners of the world, brought together by a shared love for African stories. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'll be in the comments connecting with you. And if you're enjoying this kind of storytelling, a like and a subscription would truly mean a lot. Lagos was buzzing with excitement. In the heart of Victoria Island, the wedding of Michael Adedeo, CEO of Apex Holdings and one of Nigeria's wealthiest bachelors, was underway. Gold tables lined the mansion's lawn while caterers served jollof rice, peppered snails, and champagne to Lagos elite. But behind the mansion's towering fence, in a dirty gutter, a girl crouched in silence. Her name was Susan. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her stomach cramped with hunger as she clutched her torn blue jean. Susan had lived on Lagos streets for 10 years, ever since she was 16. She had returned to Lagos with no memory of her past, only fragments and a strange feeling that this city held answers she couldn't remember. At 26, Susan had learned the harsh rules of survival. She knew which shop owners would chase her away and which might spare leftover food. She knew when it was safe to search for food behind restaurants, when the rains would flood her hiding places. Through the fence, she watched wealthy guests in elaborate traditional attire moving around the wedding. The smell of food tortured her, rich aromas that made her mouth water and her stomach clench desperately. Susan had 2 sacred rules: never beg, never steal. For 10 years in Lagos, she had survived on scraps and the occasional kindness of strangers. Today, she was about to break one of those rules. When the waiters turned away, Susan climbed the fence. Her thin frame slipped through security unnoticed. The buffet stretched before her. Golden platters held meat pies with perfectly browned crusts. She moved like a ghost, grabbing 2 pies and a bottle of Sprite before darting behind a draped table. She lifted the first pie to her lips when someone screamed, "Thief! There's a thief!" The word cut through the evening air. Conversation stopped. Laughter died. The live band fell silent. Security guards charged toward her. Guests turned, pulling out phones. Susan tried to run, but 2 guards grabbed her arms and dragged her out. Her bare feet scraped grass, her face streaked with tears. Cameras flashed. Cruel laughter rose from the crowd. Who invited this mad girl here? Is this supposed to be a charity event? Call the police, someone demanded. The guards tightened their grip, dragging Susan toward the exit. The music had died completely. All eyes were on the spectacle she had created. Just as they reached the edge of the gathering, someone shouted, "Stop!" Michael Adedeo stepped forward, his cream agbada flowing behind him. But something had caught his eye, a distinctive birthmark on Susan's left hand as she struggled against the guards. His confident expression changed to one of confusion, then recognition. He moved toward her with concern in his eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Susan looked up at him, defiant despite her circumstances. "Why do you want to know my name?" As he walked closer, something strange began to happen. Susan felt like she had seen this stranger before, but she couldn't remember where or when. The feeling was overwhelming, like trying to grasp a dream that kept slipping away. "I think I have seen you somewhere before," Michael said, his voice softer now. "Please, what's your name?" Susan hesitated, studying his face. Something about his eyes, the way he carried himself, felt familiar. "My name is Susan," she said reluctantly. Michael was taken aback. His eyes fixed on the birthmark on her arm, a crescent-shaped mark he remembered from childhood. "That birthmark on your arm," he started. Susan quickly tried to cover it with her other hand. "Is your name Susan Adedeo?" His voice was barely a whisper now. "Are your parents Mr. Roland and Mrs. Deborah Adedeo?" Susan's knees gave out. She sank to the ground, her whole body shaking. "How do you know my parents' names? Who are you?" Michael slowly knelt beside her, his eyes watery and voice breaking with emotion. I am, your brother, Michael." They both broke down in tears. The wedding guests watched in stunned silence as the groom and the girl who had stolen food from his wedding embraced, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael's bride, Christy, angry and embarrassed at what her perfect wedding was becoming, stormed over to them. "Why are you acting all strange just because this stranger claims to be your sister?" she hissed. "We have guests, for goodness sake." Michael looked up, finally acknowledging her presence. "Christy, this is my sister." Christy folded her arms, her voice rising. "Your sister? That thief who crashed our wedding? You've lost your mind, Michael. This day was supposed to be about us." He didn't respond. Instead, he stood up with Susan still clinging to his arm. Then he turned to the stunned crowd. His voice carried across the silent gathering. "The wedding is over. Everyone, please leave my house immediately." Guests erupted in shock and anger, but slowly they began to file out of the beautiful compound. Christy turned away in fury, her wedding dress trailing behind her as she left with her furious family. Michael's aunt, Ursula, who had raised him after his parents died, approached them. "Michael, do not do this here. Not now. This is supposed to be your wedding day," she pleaded, but her voice carried an edge that neither sibling noticed in their emotional reunion. Michael barely heard her. All that mattered was Susan, his little sister who he thought had died 22 years ago. Later that evening, as the mansion emptied and silence replaced celebration, Michael and Susan sat in his study. Susan, now cleaned up and wearing a simple dress, looked so different from the girl who had climbed his fence hours earlier. "Tell me everything," Michael said softly. Susan's voice was hoarse from crying. "I don't remember much from before I was 6. There was a terrible accident, a car going off a bridge. I was thrown out before the car went over. I sustained injuries to my throat, so I couldn't speak for a while. The strangers who found me left the state with me, and no one came to claim me." Michael's hands clenched into fists. "The investigators told us your body was never recovered. We thought you were dead. Our parents, they died in that crash. After the accident I had no memory of my family, nothing. I lived with those people until I was 16, but they weren't kind to me. I ran away and somehow found my way back to Lagos 10 years ago. I've been on the streets ever since, always feeling like I was searching for something I couldn't name. Our parents were among the richest people in the nation," Michael explained. "After the accident, I inherited everything. Aunt Ursula became my guardian. She's been managing the family business alongside me." Susan looked around the opulent study. "And now you're one of the most powerful men in Nigeria." "But I was never complete," Michael said, reaching for her hand. "There was always something missing. I threw myself into business, into building the empire larger, but nothing filled the emptiness where my family should have been." They talked through the night, sharing memories that slowly returned to Susan. Fragments of their childhood, their parents' laughter, the big house they had lived in before everything changed. As dawn broke, Michael made a decision that would change everything. "Susan, half of everything is yours. I have called the lawyers to start the process. The company, the properties, the investments. You're my sister, and you deserve your inheritance." Susan shook her head. "I've lived without money for 10 years, Michael. I don't need wealth. I just need to know I have a family again." "You'll always have that," Michael promised, pulling her into another embrace. Susan's presence transformed him. The cold businessman who had been planning a strategic marriage began to see the world through different eyes. She showed him parts of Lagos he had never seen, introduced him to people whose stories broke his heart and inspired his soul. But their happiness was being watched by someone who had very different plans. Exactly 3 months after the wedding, Michael woke up with a strange feeling of unease. He had planned to have breakfast with Susan in the garden, their daily routine that had become the best part of his day. But when he knocked on her door, there was no answer. He pushed the door open and found her room empty. Her few belongings were gone. The bed was neatly made, as if she had never been there at all. Panic shot through him like electricity. "Susan," he called out, running through the mansion. "Susan!" The staff hadn't seen her. Security had no record of her leaving. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. While he was trying to wrap his head around his sister's sudden disappearance, his phone buzzed with a bank alert. A debit of 50 million naira from one of his accounts. Michael stared at the message in disbelief. His hands shook as he read it again. 50 million naira, gone. He was confused, desperate. Where was his sister? Why had such a large sum been withdrawn? For 3 days, he searched everywhere. He drove through the neighborhoods where Susan had lived, showing her photo to anyone who would look. He called hospitals, police stations, shelters. He hired private investigators, offered massive rewards, used every resource at his disposal. Nothing. It was as if Susan Adideo had never existed. On the 3rd day, his assistant brought him an envelope that had been delivered by courier. Michael tore it open with trembling hands, hoping for answers, for some explanation that would make sense of his sister's disappearance. The letter was written in Susan's handwriting, but the words felt like daggers to his heart. "Dear Michael, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but I couldn't keep pretending anymore. Did you really think I was your sister? Did you really think that after 22 years, I would just randomly show up at your wedding? I've been planning this for months. I researched your family, learned about the sister you lost, even her name. The emotional story? All fabricated. You rich people are so naive, so desperate to believe in fairy tales. You wanted a sister so badly that you never questioned whether I was real. You were just a rich fool who fell for sad sob stories. The 50 million is just the beginning. You paused your wedding, ruined your reputation, and were ready to give everything up for me. How does it feel to know it was all a lie? Don't bother looking for me. By the time you read this, I'll be far away, living comfortably on your money. Thanks for the inheritance. Your dear sister, Susan." Michael read the letter several times before the words fully sank in. Then rage exploded through him like a volcano. He kicked the table in the garden where they had shared so many conversations, sending their glasses of Zobo crashing to the ground. The woman he had paused his wedding for, damaged his reputation for, was ready to give everything up for, was a con artist. A fraud who had manipulated his grief and loneliness for money. But even as anger consumed him, something wasn't adding up. He had spent 3 months with Susan, had seen her genuine fear of wealth, her discomfort with luxury, her authentic stories of street survival. Could someone really fake all of that? Even though he had only known her for 3 months, he knew deep down that she would not do something like this. The Susan who had helped serve food to street children, who cried when she talked about her lost parents, who had nightmares about being alone, that woman wouldn't write such a cold, calculating letter. He vowed to find her and understand why she had done this. Because something was very, very wrong with this picture. Behind the scenes, what Michael didn't know was that he had disrupted something far bigger than a wedding. By calling it off, he had crossed some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the country. The event was never meant to be about love, and Susan was never supposed to be in the picture. Michael's aunt, Ursula, had engineered the wedding for years. It was never just a ceremony, it was a transaction. A merger. The union of 2 dominant families that would grant Ursula unfiltered access to financial empires she'd spent 2 decades trying to penetrate. The marriage contract had already been structured. The moment Michael said, "I do," half the Adideo family fortune would legally transfer to his wife. Through a complex network of shell companies, legal proxies, and trusts, Ursula would pull the strings from behind the scenes. She wouldn't need the family's permission. She would own them. Christie was carefully chosen. She wasn't picked for love. She was selected because she was controllable. Her family was buried in debt and ready to accept any conditions Ursula imposed. They needed the Idideo money. Ursula needed the leverage. But Susan's arrival changed the equation. So Ursula moved fast. She had Susan drugged during dinner, and while Michael was distracted, Susan was taken. No trace. No struggle. No witnesses. Ursula accessed the family accounts through Susan's credentials. She forced Susan to write the letter, cold, calculated words that painted her as a manipulative fraud. Michael never saw it coming. He believed the letter. He believed the missing money. He believed the lie. While he sat in his garden, surrounded by broken glass and disbelief, Susan was locked up somewhere far away. Ursula didn't stop there. She activated a fallback plan, one that would erase Susan permanently. No body. No trail. Just a perfect vanishing act. The kind of story people stop asking about after a few weeks. And Michael, heartbroken, confused, betrayed, was exactly where Ursula needed him to be. Disarmed. Alone. Unaware that the only person who could stop this was the one person no one knew was still alive. The game wasn't over. It had just entered its next phase.